My name is Sarah Beth Harrison, and I'm a forensic interviewer here at the Oak House Children's Advocacy Center. We are actually here in our forensic interview room where we do conduct our interviews on children, sometimes even adults. For the year of 2026, we want to get into the community and raise awareness on specific topics, give information. So we are planning on doing a video once a month of different topics. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Today, we are interviewing Special Agent Cheryl Nix, assigned to the Heat Unit with a GBI. Fun fact about Cheryl is she is also trained in forensic interviewing, but we're going to let Cheryl introduce herself.
Yes, thank you for having me today. So my name is Cheryl Nix, and I am assigned to the GBI Heat Unit, which is the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. I've been there for 3 or 4 years now, and prior to that, though, I've been in law enforcement for 15 years and specialized in crimes against children. So that transferred over to the Heat Unit, which has been an adventure. So I'm excited today to talk about the child sex trafficking aspect.
Cheryl, can you explain to us one common myth about human trafficking?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest myths is that people always think of the movie Take, or they think of this occurring all the way in California or big cities like Atlanta. Nobody really thinks about the reality of it takes place right here in small town Georgia every single day.
Yes, people think that we're just exempt from things happening here in small town Georgia.
Another common myth is when people think that a barcode is going to be a tattoo on a victim. That's not the case at all. But a lot of victims do have tattoos, whether they are a crown, a money sign, or a lot of times what we see is the trafficker's nickname. There was one instance where a girl had God's princess tattooed on her. Well, she lived in a very Bible Belt area, and so everybody thought, oh, she just got a tattoo because she loves Jesus. And in reality, her pimp's nickname was God on the street. And so he had tattooed her or branded her, letting the other traffickers know that that was his girl. And a lot of times they're visible. They're not going to be hidden in areas where other people can't see. We've had kids that have had their traffickers tattooed the names on their faces, as well as their arms or their chest or on their back somewhere where it can be seen.
How does human trafficking often begin?
So a lot of times what we see, depending, because there are two different types of trafficking. You have labor trafficking, you have sex trafficking. On the sex trafficking side of things, a lot of times it starts through social media, honestly. We have had a number of cases where kids have actually been lured in by TikTok or the use of gaming platforms. And they begin communicating with somebody that they believe is their friend, that cares about them, that wants to pay them attention. And at that point, they begin to communicate with this person on a regular basis, and then they end up trusting this person, and this person a lot of times will buy things for them, especially if they come from a home that they don't have access to different things like cell phones or the clothing that are in style at school. And so this person comes along and offers them these things that they're not used to having. And at that point, after that, and then they begin to trust them, then they begin to tell them, hey, we require things in return for the items I'm buying for you.
Is there an average age that you guys see more often than most?
A lot of times we see teenagers, anywhere from typical 12 to 17 years old.
You talked about the two categories of human trafficking. You said labor and what was the other one? Sex trafficking. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. So sex trafficking obviously is a person is under the age of 18 is having sex or offering any type of sexual activity in return for something. And it doesn't have to necessarily be money. Sometimes it could be for housing or for a new pair of shoes or for a cell phone. Then you have labor trafficking, which is on the side of what we see a lot of South Georgia is agricultural labor trafficking. There's working in hotels or there is working in factories. You see that more up in North Georgia, but here in South Georgia, we see a lot of agricultural labor trafficking.
So, why is trafficking sometimes harder to recognize in these smaller rural cities? I know we said that most people think this is going on in Atlanta or a larger city. And why is that harder to recognize here?
I think one reason is people thinking that it only occurs in bigger cities. And so a lot of times they're not looking for these things in the smaller towns. They feel safer there. But the reality is it happens in every single town. A lot of times, excuse me, you see where you have people coming from out of town and they may be staying in a hotel for only a few weeks or at an apartment complex. And because they're moving around a lot, it's a little harder to detect, especially if the people aren't from around in the area. Most people in small towns know all the people that live there or know about the people in that area. So if it's somebody, an outsider, they're less likely to look at them.
Is there warning signs that people in the community should be aware of for day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are seeing people at a hotel and you're seeing an older female and a younger female, and you're seeing a lot of traffic coming in and out of that room at all hours of the night, you're seeing the teenager in the out and about with an older man in a store where he's paying for her clothing with cash. They're not in school in the hours that they should be in school. If it's a child that is known to people in that town and they know that this child does not have the money to have these nice clothes or a designer pocketbook, or then all of a sudden they are coming to school or they're attending events where they have all of these expensive items that they really shouldn't have, those are all warning signs that they potentially are a trafficking victim.
How often do these victims know their trafficker?
So that is a tough one when you're talking about sex trafficking. Not always is a known person. A lot of times they're being recruited. Now it may be by somebody they know vaguely or know of, or it may be somebody that they've never even met before. Like I talked about earlier, we had a case where they were actually lured in through TikTok, and it was somebody they had never even met before. The other thing is when you see on the labor trafficking side of things, it typically is a family member. A lot of times, what we see in the agricultural labor trafficking is it's an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. It is actually a family member who is trafficking them on the labor trafficking side of things.
So we've talked about social media a little bit with TikTok and things like that. What is one thing or some things that parents or caregivers can do to help keep their kids safe, especially online and via social media?
It's a very scary world we live in today with
Very.
the access that kids have, because now not only do they get it sometimes when they're out, but they also have to have access for school projects and
Mhm.
things. So most every single child across America now has access to and is required to have access to the internet. But unfortunately, on those platforms, they are designed for kids. Almost all of them are designed for kids at least of 13 years old and older. But we know that every child that's using it is not that age. And when they get on these sites, if they're talking to people that they have no idea who they are, that is a very scary thing, because it could be a perpetrator that is presenting themselves as another child that's 10 to 12 years old. And in reality, it's a 45-year-old male who is working on luring the child in to groom them for sex trafficking. We see it on social media platforms, somebody just responding and telling them nice things to start with. Hey, they like a picture, you look beautiful, you should be a model, and then the conversation goes from there. So any activity on a child's account needs to be definitely watched over and made sure that the parent knows what their child is on, who the children are talking to. If their kid is on it at odd hours, at times they should be in bed or in school, or their grades are slipping, things like that, they should really pay attention to in the online world, and also who their friends are in general. If their friends have access to things that your child doesn't have access to, that also can open up doors that necessarily you don't allow in your home, but could be allowed in a friend's home.
So, is there a conversation that you think parents could have with their child when it comes to online safety and things like that?
Absolutely. I think the more open communication between the parents and the kids definitely helps to make the kids more aware. If the kids, it's in anything, if you don't know, you can't do anything about it, right? So if a parent takes the time to actually have those conversations to the kids to be aware that these things are real and they really can happen to anybody, it's not just on the movie on TV, I think that at least helps somewhat.
Yes, I try to tell people all the time as an adult, you have access to all these things on your phone. So once you open up the doorway to your child and say, hey, here is a phone, they have access to everything that you have access to as well. So, like you said, monitoring, staying on top of it, and also just being aware, like you said, of your surroundings and what's going on, paying attention to things. We've talked about some apps and things like that. Is there apps out there that are more known for trafficking and things like that?
Not really. We see it across the board, whether it is
Any app from Facebook to
mm-hmm,
TikTok to we said about gaming apps, they do
mm-hmm,
that sometimes as well. So no
absolutely.
app is off limits.
That's exactly right.
If someone feels concerned but isn't sure what they're seeing, what should they do? If they see someone out in the store and, like you said, paying for this or the relationship just seems off, is there something that you recommend that they should do in that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. They should definitely say something, right? So if you see it, you can call your local law enforcement and report it to them, or you can call the 1-800 Georgia Human Trafficking number. That goes through, ends up actually coming to our department at the GBI, and it gets dispersed through. We filter through to see what those look like, where they are, and then begin to look at them.
Why is trafficking sometimes harder to recognize in smaller rural communities?
Yeah, so a lot of times if you're talking about labor trafficking, it's much harder to see because you have the workers in the field, right? And a lot of times they're all covered up, especially if it's juveniles that are being trafficked. They are told to make sure that they cover their face, they cover their head, so they're less likely to be pointed out and noticed as being much younger than the other workers. A lot of times they're also told what to say if asked, why aren't you in school? Especially the ones that are from the Guatemala, Venezuela area, they're told to say, oh, I don't want to go to school because in those areas they're not required to go the full years like they are here in America. So they have certain phrases and certain things that they're told to say to make sure that people don't ask further questions of them. A lot of times they're told you don't talk to outside people, and they also don't speak the language. So the language barrier is extremely difficult to overcome when you're trying to figure out are they a victim or not, especially for someone just running into them in the grocery store or somewhere else. When you're talking about the sex trafficking stuff, it's a lot harder to see just because it's not something you're looking for. If it's an older female and a younger female, a lot of times, hey, they think this may be their aunt or it may be their cousin, or in reality, it's the older female who is also being trafficked, but she's running the younger girls.
That's something people don't realize either, is that most of the time that it could be an older female that is with the younger female and they, didn't you say, recruit them in a sense?
Correct. Yes, and we have seen also where other juveniles recruit, whether they're in RYDC together or they go to high school together, and one ends up being trafficked and she's brought on by a female, and then she starts recruiting other girls her age, and so it's not always just this
Gender specific with a
correct.
male, it could also be a female.
Correct.
All right. Cheryl, is there one message you want our community to remember during Human Trafficking Awareness Month? What is there one thing that you want to get across when you're talking about human trafficking?
Just be aware that it takes place every single day in small town Georgia just as much as it does in Atlanta or any bigger city. Like I said, I work all of South Georgia, and I literally am slammed with so many cases from just small town Georgia with sex trafficking cases as well as labor trafficking cases. So it is a real thing that is occurring every single day in every town.
It absolutely is. Well, Cheryl, we thank you for coming in today and having a conversation and giving us some information. And if anyone has any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to us via Facebook Messenger or call our center at any time with any question. And like Cheryl said, see something, say something.